Our next talk in this chamber will be by Joshua Sosa, who is going to be presenting a paper entitled The Subtle Magic of Epithets in Harry Potter. Let us welcome Joshua.
As most of us already know, an epithet is a descriptive word or phrase attributed to a person, place, or thing. They're commonly recognized as literary tools that are found in works of fiction and folklore, but there are several historical and real-world examples of epithets too. The unsinkable Molly Brown, Isildur's Bane, and the city that never sleeps, just to name a few. Harry Potter is no stranger to epithets, and the author made extensive uses of them throughout the 7-book series. So today, we'll be examining the literary text of Harry Potter to discuss the personal significances, narrative implications, and evolving natures of 4 epithets in the series. So, let's start with The Boy Who Lived. The Boy Who Lived is the title of the first chapter of The Sorcerer's Stone, and as such, frames the narrative around the series' titular character, Harry Potter. When he was just a year old, Harry miraculously survived a fatal attack on his family by he who must not be named, losing his parents, but somehow banishing the greatest dark wizard of the age from Britain. Harry lived where so many others had perished, making him a unique and perhaps even special child. The Boy Who Lived is only used 11 times in the series, not including chapter title, and it is indirectly referenced 7 times, including some of the examples here on the screen, like the boy who brought around you-know-who's fall from power, the boy who scored, and the boy who has survived by accident. And yet, despite not appearing directly in books 2 through 4, I would argue that The Boy Who Lived is the most mythologically charged epithet in the entire series. So, what do I mean by mythologically charged? Well, let's listen to this quote, which features the only time the epithet is used in The Sorcerer's Stone. And it's a long one. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's screams as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." As the first chapter ends, we're introduced to the idea of Harry becoming an overnight legend. Within a decade, his name and story would appear in at least 3 history books, according to Hermione, and the boy who lived would become as commonly known as other legendary witches and wizards. By the Deathly Hallows, the book in which the epithet is most used, it is clear that the wizarding community sees Harry as a symbol of defiance against the revived threat of you-know-who and the Death Eaters. This is stated not once, but twice by Lupin in the quotes beside me, which I'll read. "That's certainly part of it," said Lupin, "and is a masterstroke. Now that Dumbledore is dead, you, the boy who lived, were sure to be the symbol and rallying point for any resistance to, well, you guys know." And again, the boy who lived remains a symbol of everything for which we are fighting: the triumph of good, the power of innocence, the need to keep resisting. Furthermore, there are several religious undertones to the perception of Harry. As you could read from the slides here, the Potters' dilapidated home in Godric's Hollow had become a cenotaph, with witches and wizards having made pilgrimages to the site over the years and leaving notes of blessings to the boy who lived. And later, after the Battle of Hogwarts has ended, we get a truly biblical moment of Harry surrounded by his friends and supporters, all wanting to bask in his presence as if he were a demigod or messiah. So back to my original question. What do I mean by mythologically charged? Well, as an establishing element of the series, I believe that the epithet imbues the subsequent 7-book narrative with a sense of modern myth-making being experienced in real time. Harry embodies numerous mythic ideas interpreted by the author when writing the series, while living in a world where myths can still be made. The boy who lived, whether as an 11-year-old or a 17-year-old wizard, symbolizes hope as much to the characters in-universe as he does adventure and maturity to the readers from without. So, now let's turn to something less grandiose and a bit more morose. I'm going to talk about Severus Snape, the self-proclaimed Half-Blood Prince. The Half-Blood Prince is the epithet that Severus secretly assumed while still a student at Hogwarts, inscribing it in his copy of Advanced Potions Making, along with annotations on spellcraft and chemistry. It is also the subtitle of the 6th book in the series, in which Harry discovers and becomes enthralled by the now tattered potions textbook, ignorant of its former ownership. The epithet appears 27 times in the 6th book, and is referenced thrice in chapter titles, including one that takes place in the Deathly Hallows. But why does Severus choose this epithet for himself? What might it symbolize? So, let's break down the evidence. Severus was born a half-blood, meaning he had one magical and one non-magical parent. It is heavily implied that Severus's father, Tobias Snape, was a physically and mentally abusive husband and father, leading the young wizard to develop a prejudice against Muggles and those with Muggle heritage, and this might even include himself. Severus attended Hogwarts alongside other future Death Eaters, who likely vindicated his personal grudges and bigoted ideas, and the use of his mother's surname, Prince, may have been a way to distance himself from his Muggle heritage, while aggrandizing his magical talent and lineage despite the obscurity of the Prince family in the series. But all this got me wondering if the epithet wasn't a double entendre. While Severus is the obvious prince in question, given the amount of focus that he receives in the book, the epithet might also refer to Tom Riddle. So, let's check the evidence again. Tom was a half-blood. He had a Muggle father and a witch mother, just like Severus. Tom was utterly disgusted by having a Muggle father who, if you'll recall, he expected to be magical, and was zealously valuing his magical lineage throughout his life. Tom took for himself the title the Heir of Slytherin as the last living descendant of Salazar Slytherin, a legendary wizard with a radically racist legacy. And Tom was also presumably, the last living descendant of Cadmus Peverell. You would not believe how many times I've practiced saying that. One of the mythical Peverell brothers who first owned or created the Deathly Hallows. You could even interpret Severus's potions textbook as a pseudo-Horcrux. Tom's diary was possessed by a memory of himself as a student that can show the reader glimpses of Tom's own past, whereas Severus's textbook represented his social struggles, brooding emotions, and dark impulses as a youth. The diary could bewitch people and imbue them with Tom's own powers, namely speaking parcel tongue, while the jinxes and curses Severus created and annotated in his textbook became common knowledge to school bullies and pranksters. And Tom hid the then Horcruxed diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw, another thing that I had to practice about 50 times, which is said to impart wisdom onto its wearer, in the Room of Requirement, which is exactly where Harry hides the potions textbook after fatally wounding Malfoy with Sectum Sempra. The connection between Tom and Severus is something Harry even comments on later in the book, as seen in the quotes beside me. This leads me to suspect that the Half-Blood Prince, as a subtitle and epithet, is constantly shifting throughout the narrative and splitting the reader's attention with a literary sleight of hand. So are we talking about the young wizard who so impressed Professor Slughorn with their potioneering? Or are we talking about the student who grew up in an oppressive and antithetical environment? Which is which? With that, we arrive at He Who Must Not Be Named. He Who Must Not Be Named is one of the many epithets given to the dark wizard formerly known as Tom Marvolo Riddle. It appears 49 times in the series, 15 of which take place in the Half-Blood Prince, with it even spoken 9 times in the first chapter, The Other Minister. As with The Boy Who Lived, the epithet is only used once in The Sorcerer's Stone, when Ollivander discloses to Harry the existence of his wand's twin. When we next hear it said, it comes from Dobby in the Chamber of Secrets, who goes into a panic after Harry uses the Dark Wizard's chosen name, saying, "Speak not the name." It's as if hearing the name inflicts a curse of misfortune on all those present when it's spoken, causing most witches and wizards to flinch, as Professor McGonagall does in The Boy Who Lived, first chapter of Sorcerer's Stone. So, question for you all. How does the idea of not speaking the name manifest throughout the series? Let's see. The wizarding community, who are still fearful of him even in exile, refer to him as He Who Must Not Be Named, or you-know-who, and this also goes into the Daily Prophet. His followers reverently call him the Dark Lord for his prowess in dark magic, and of course, none of them are his equals, even those who went to school with him. And the Dark Lord is also a poetic nomenclature, as it shows up in Professor Trelawney's 2 prophecies throughout the series. Harry and Dumbledore often address him by his given name, Tom Riddle, to enrage and belittle him while freely using his chosen name to challenge the fear that he instills in others. And this, of course, trickles down to the members of the Order of the Phoenix, who also use his chosen name as acts of defiance. This is something that even Grindelwald, who we'll get to soon, does, mockingly disregarding him as just another dark wizard upstart. But speaking not the name takes a whole new meaning when uttering Voldemort becomes taboo. Here's a quote from the Deathly Hallows, and we'll have just heard part of this before. "Sorry," said Ron, wrenching Harry back out of the brambles. "But the name's been jinxed, Harry. That's how they track people. Using his name breaks protective enchantments. It causes some kind of magical disturbance. It's how they found us in Tottenham Court Road. It was only people who were serious about standing up to him, like Dumbledore, who ever dared use it. Now they've put a taboo on it. Anyone who says it is trackable. Quick and easy way to find Order members." Thus, not long after the start of the Deathly Hallows, Tom Riddle well and truly becomes what we've known him to be from the very beginning, but amplified. Tom is now he who must not be named, as to speak the name Voldemort is to invite danger and death. In other words, speak of the devil, and he doth appear. So as our last point, I want to end with a quick look at a rather subtle but deeply influential epithet attributed to Albus Dumbledore as the only one he ever feared. And I want you to think about who the he may be referring to. Across the series, 5 different characters make 8 separate references to the apparent fact that Voldemort fears Dumbledore above any other wizard. And it feels like it is mentioned constantly throughout the books. Thrice it is mentioned in The Sorcerer's Stone, from as early as the first chapter, by McGonagall, right after she, of course, flinches at hearing Dumbledore say Voldemort, Hagrid, and Hermione in that order. Harry insults the memory of Tom Riddle in the Chamber of Secrets by saying that even in the present, his disembodied soul fears Dumbledore, before making subsequent mentions in the 3rd, 4th, and 6th books. And Bill Weasley makes a reference to it in the Order of the Phoenix when citing Voldemort's frustration at being unable to have hidden his resurrection. And of course, it is in the 5th book where all previous mentions finally come to fruition. After being beaten over the head with this notion of Voldemort's fear of Dumbledore, we, the reader, see Dumbledore's magical prowess on full display during his fateful duel with Voldemort at the Ministry of Magic. And when does this happen? In chapter 36 of the Order of the Phoenix, aptly named, The Only One He Ever Feared. Here's a quote. "We both know that there are other ways of destroying a man, Tom," Dumbledore said calmly, continuing to walk toward Voldemort, as though he had not a fear in the world, as though nothing had happened to interrupt his stroll up the hall. "Merely taking your life would not satisfy me, I admit." Notice how Dumbledore is described as being fearless. This is not only juxtaposed to the title of the chapter, but also with what even the Death Eaters believe of their Dark Lord. Remember, just before Dumbledore appeared to rescue Harry, Bellatrix warned Voldemort, saying, "But Master, he is here. He is below." Now, you might think that with Dumbledore's death, his epithet might up and disappear. But quite the opposite happens in the Deathly Hallows. As the mysteries of Dumbledore's past are revealed, we learn about Gilbert Grindelwald, a dark wizard first referenced in the Sorcerer's Stone. Grindelwald, as Victor Crumb explains, was a Durmstrang student who attempted to dominate continental Europe, but it is said his fear of Dumbledore kept him from invading Britain. Eventually, Grindelwald and Dumbledore, who had briefly been friends, did duel, and upon his defeat, the Dark Wizard was imprisoned. Despite Crumb's assertions, however, Dumbledore felt differently. Grindelwald might have feared him, but he too feared Grindelwald. Specifically, he feared the truth behind the accidental murder of his sister, Ariana, which he believes Grindelwald might have known and weaponized against him. He berates himself as a coward, showing Harry and the reader that even the fearless headmaster of Hogwarts could be petrified into inaction. And remember, this conversation about Grindelwald happens amidst the oniric Dumbledore and Harry discussing Voldemort's fears, none of which seem to have been the aged headmaster, to say nothing of Dumbledore's distrust in himself in a place of power, being fearful of what temptation might, or might again, reawaken in him. It seems that fear and death go hand in hand, as much with Dumbledore as and as much with Dumbledore as a character as they do central themes in Harry Potter. So remind me, who is fearing who again? Now, before we get into Q&As, I love epithets. I think they're incredibly fun literary tools, and they help to give a complete picture or an understanding of a person, place, or thing with very little words. But those words are so much more than the letters that make them up. And just think, when you get to the epilogue, 19 years later, Harry isn't the boy who lived anymore. Or rather, he isn't just the baby who survived a single event. He has lived a lifetime's worth of experiences, as he says to Ron and Hermione. Today, the boy who lived has evolved to define the life of a man who lived through tragedy, lives in heroism, and thereafter hopes to live in the mundane normalcy of the wizarding world. Thank you.